So we've seen in the last couple of lectures two ways in order to refresh this iframe and reflect the changes that we do here in the actual website. So the first one was refreshing the whole iframe. So you have to contact the server and tell it, I want to refresh the iframe. And that of course is a bit slow and it takes some time. So we've seen another way to do it using the JavaScript callbacks. And using this way, we don't have to communicate with the server at all. And thus this way is the fastest. And you almost see the changes real time. But we also mentioned that this way will have its drawbacks, that you will need to duplicate your PHP logic in JavaScript, and that could be not very practical. So let's see in this lecture a third way to refresh what you change here in the website preview using what's called selective refresh. So the refresh method will refresh the whole iframe. The selective refresh will refresh just some part of the iframe. So how it works is that we send an AJAX request to the server and tell the server we need to fetch this part instead of fetching the whole website. So I think it's better to see this in action. So let's go to our code. And what we have to do is create something called a partial. So it's also in WP customize. And we will access the selective refresh object, selective underscore refresh. And then a method called add partial. So this partial gets an ID, and we'll see this in a moment, and an array of options. So the first option is the settings. And this could be an array of settings. So you put the ID of the settings here, and whenever these settings are changed, this partial will get fetched. So let's say we need to do this for the blog name. So we can put the blog name here. However, if you name the partial after the setting, you don't have to add the settings array. You only have to add the settings array if you have multiple settings that you need to fetch this partial for when they are changed. So let's add the second argument, which is a selector. And the selector is the HTML selector that we will replace the content in. So we have the header logo here, or actually the blog name. So when we change the site title here, we need to replace the text inside the blog name. So this selector is what we need. And we have another important argument called container inclusive. And what that means is when we load this partial, do we want to replace just the content inside this A tag inside this class, or replace the whole A tag? So in this case, it's false. We just need to replace the content inside the A tag. The last and the most important argument is the render callback. And this is a function that will return the content that we want to replace the stuff inside header blog name with. So let's create a function. And we can also create this function here or anywhere and then write its name here, but it's not going to be a big function, so an enormous function will be faster. So what we need to do here is run a PHP function that will return what we need to return here. And in our case, we need to get the blog title. So we get it the same way we got it in the header. So we can return what's returned from this function. So let's copy that and just put it here. And let's see what will happen now. And let's also open the network tab and clear it. And select AJAX requests here. And let's now change the title. And as you can see, it's a bit slower than the JavaScript one, but also it did not refresh the whole website. It just refreshed this part. And as you can see in the network, whenever we change something, an AJAX request gets sent. And what's returned here is the contents. The content that is returned by this render callback function. So great. So what we've done here is, instead of refreshing the whole website, we're just sending a small AJAX request in order to get the contents just for this part and not the whole website. So let's do the same thing for our footer text. So let's actually copy this instead of typing the whole thing. And then let's paste. Let's give it an ID that is unique and not a setting name. So theme name. And let's call it footer partial. And this time we'll set the settings in this array instead of the ID of the partial. So we need to run this partial when the site info is changed. So we'll put the site info setting ID here, and the selector. We have we need to replace the contents of this site info div. So let's add this. Let's add. So and container inclusive, we'll see this in a moment. So let's see what we need to run here. So let's go to the footer and let's see what we do in order to get this site info part. So we run get template part and then get this template. So we can do exactly the same thing. So let's copy this. So this is one more advantage of using get template parts. We can use them to load little pieces of code in the partials here. So let's do that. And now the get template part, it will return the what is contained in the info, which is here. So what is contained in the info contains the site info class. So if we leave the container inclusive to false, it will get the template part which contains the site info class and then add it in the site info class again. So we'll have site info class inside of it, another site info class. So this time we want to set container inclusive to true. So that way the partial will replace the whole site info class that already exists and will not put the contents inside of it. So I hope that's clear. And oh, by the way, when we use partials, we still need to set the transport to post message. And that way we will avoid refreshing the whole iframe. But if a partial exists for this setting, it won't run the JavaScript callbacks. It will, however, load the partial instead. So let's try that. And as you can see, it added the button here. It's awkwardly positioned, but we can adjust that with CSS. But let's try it for now. Let's click on it and it will take you directly to the setting. And then when we change something, we just load this part of the website. And as you can see here, if we type a lot of text, it will wait until we stop and then send one request. It won't send a request for each character we type. So great, we're now able to exactly preview here what will be previewed in the actual website because we use the same function and we're not loading the entire iframe. It may be a little bit slower than the JavaScript, but it's a trade-off. I think it has a real advantage of not repeating your PHP code in JavaScript. And also, as I mentioned, if you add more, we only have one setting now, but if you add more settings in that setting array, you can refresh this partial for many settings and not just one. And we'll use that later in the course when we add more options. One more thing before ending this lecture. Let's close this. If we add widgets now, let's say in the footer, it refreshes the whole website. And you can also use selective refresh for widgets, but your theme have to opt in to support that. So let's go to the theme support file and let's add another line. And this would be, of course, add theme support. And the feature is called customize selective refresh widgets. So when you support this feature, it and refresh the customizer. And let's add a widget now. And it will load for the first time because we don't have any widgets. But let's try now and add another one, calendar, and it will be added. And let's try in a new order without refreshing at all. And you also now get these buttons here that when you click, it will open the setting for this widget. So great. So you can also notice that WordPress internally uses selective refresh for the navigation as well. And we already seen that when we refresh, when we reorder, only the menu will get refreshed. Great. So now that we know all the different options that we can use, let's now try and add some more options. We still have the photo columns and the photo background and stuff like that. So let's do that in the next lecture.